to the continuing worldwide adventure of International Podcast Day 2019. It's great to be back on the air as we hook up for our next session. And I think this is going to be fabulous. And it's from the individuals that we know well, our favorite Florida podcasters. And Jimmy, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Doing well. It's been a whirlwind already, but we're getting there.
It is. It is. I mean, what you guys have established in these last few years with International Podcast Day is just it's amazing to watch it grow. So I'm just thankful to once again be asked to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. Anytime. So I know I had to cut your time because we ran over on the last one. So I'm going to let you get going right now.
Okay, here we go. All right, I'm excited. Okay, so I am Jaime. I'm the founder of Flintstone Media. For anybody who is unaware of my background, it's Flintstone Media. It's been around since 2010, and it's now a podcast production company. And I'm also the founder of the Florida Podcast Network, the organizer of the Palm Beach Podcasters Meetup Group, a host of a couple of shows, Finding Florida and Florida Podcasting News. I'm also a founding board member for the International Podcast Association, production manager for the Horse Radio Network, and podcast director for the Wedding Biz Network. I think that just about covers it. And I'm really excited because what I'm going to be talking to everybody about today is networks and networking, which are the kings of collaboration. And I'm excited to bring in as my first guest, first up to talk, my partner in most of my podcasting crime, Glenn the Geek. So Glenn the Geek, he is one of the earlier pioneers of podcasting. He started Horse Radio Network back in 2008, starting with his show Stable Scoop Radio. He had no listeners at the time, but he's since grown it to almost 20 shows listened to all over the world. He's launched the Finding Florida podcast with me in October 2017 and officially joined Florida Podcast Network as Chief Fun Officer. He came up with his own title in April of 2018. And he's now also co-hosting Florida Podcasting News Show and Finding Florida, both with me. And he became, as well, most recently, a founding board member of the International Podcast Association. Welcome, Glenn.
It's good to be here again. This is fun. It's been so long since I've seen you.
I know, like yesterday. How was the drive home? So FYI, Glenn often comes down to South Florida where I am because we do all kinds of adventures for Finding Florida. And you just left yesterday to head back home. How was the drive?
It was fine. It was good. Florida gets boring in the middle, but otherwise it's fine.
It does. But that's all right. Okay, so let's do what we're here to do today and pick your brain. I know that people ask you all the time about building networks. I mean, you're just the network guru. So let's not split hairs. Dive into it. How is HRN structured? Let's give us the down low.
Well, we own, we have a network about 20 shows, as you said. And there's two different ways we structure our shows. One is we have shows that are owned by the Horse Radio Network. So what that means is we own them, we pay the hosts, and then we also find the sponsors.
Yeah.
And then we have shows, ours is a little different because we also have shows we call affiliate shows. They're owned by somebody else, let's say a magazine or a website or an individual, and they pay to be on the network. We do all the production, but they sell their own sponsorships.
Right.
So they're paying us a flat fee to be on the network, and then we do all the production. We do everything. For all the shows, we do all the production, which is a little different than a lot of networks that the individual hosts will do the production of the shows. We actually do all of that in-house.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that difference is because of when you started. I mean, back when you started in 2008, there were no other podcasts. You were the only one. There were no other independent podcasters.
Well, there were no horsey podcasts like that. That's for sure. And there was no model back then. We really didn't have a model. We were all we didn't have any rules either. We were all just winging it. I hear about all the rules of podcasting today. Well, I've broken 99% of those.
You really have.
I still am.
So some of your shows are produced your own. You own them. They're produced all of them are produced in house, but you own some of them. But for the affiliate shows, because people can create their own shows for their own networks all day long. I do a lot of that Florida Podcast Network, but you could also acquire affiliates to become parts on the network and have their shows and do what you're just talking about. How do you approach affiliates? What is your process? And just both from the early days and what have you kept as those tricks for that to this day?
Well, because when we started with one show with the Horse Radio Network, and by the way, you can start a network with one show. That's the
You
other
can.
question I get a lot.
Yeah.
Is, I only have one show, but I want to have a network eventually. Do I start the network now? Yes, start the
Yes.
network now. It's just going to have one show. Florida Podcast Network had one show for a while.
Right. The
Has to
Wedding Biz
start
Network
somewhere.
only has one show.
Yeah, exactly.
It's growing. It's growing.
Yeah, but start with that one show, and
Yeah.
then I did it very strategically because I started Horse Radio Network as a business. I really wanted it to be a business. I wanted to make my living doing it someday.
Right.
And we approached people to do shows that had a large following to begin with in the horse world. So I went to magazines, to blogs, to mostly magazines or newspapers in the horse world and said, hey, look, why don't we get involved? Why don't you get involved in a current show I have? And then I would give them a segment, get them involved, get them getting some pride in what they were doing.
Right.
And then they spun it off into their own show.
Because those magazines and things, they were people that had both, number one, content already,
right.
and number two, advertisers and sponsors already that they're working with.
And followers. A lot of followers, because that's the thing we're all missing when we start out is who's going to listen, right? We're missing followers, we're missing listeners. So you go to people when you're starting a network that already have that in some other way, and sure, they're going to go listen to their show first, but as we all know, they don't listen to just one show.
Right. In the end, they, as you are very famous for saying, they come for the content and they stay for the host. And part of the benefit of building an actual podcast network and growing it to more than one show is that then your hosts can guest host on different shows or provide content or do different things like that. And I think you started that kind of practice with the flagship show on HRN, even though it wasn't the first show, Stable Scoop was. But Horses in the Morning has really become the flagship show. And what's been great about how you're using that is you're using it as such a sandbox, as a testing ground, and also as a audition ground for future hosts and future content contributors and people to be part of the network and have their own shows. Everything kind of sprouts and springs out of a lot of stuff from Horse Radio Network. Horses in the Morning. How does that work?
Yeah, and Horses in the Morning is a 5-day-a-week live show that we do. And most people don't listen live. We wouldn't have to do it live. It has a feel. We wanted it to be that way. But it's 5 days a week, 90 minutes a day. By the way, breaking the other big rule that's out there now that your show has to be 20 minutes. So our 90-minute 5-day-a-week
Which neither one of us endorses, by the way.
Yeah,
it needs to be as long as it needs to be.
We don't. As long as it's not boring, you can go.
Right.
And it is our most popular show and our most profitable show.
Right.
But we use it. We've always hired our hosts by having them as a guest first and not telling them. We have them as a guest, and if they're a good guest and they're entertaining and they're fun, and yet they get the point across, then we approach them about being a host. But and then there's a lot of people I've had on as guests, and I hope they're not listening right now, that we've had on as guests.
They don't know. They're thinking they're going to think you're talking about someone else.
That's right. But then we didn't hire them because they weren't a good guest. They weren't, they were just, for whatever reason, they weren't a good guest. So we didn't hire them.
Right.
But so in a way, we've auditioned all the hosts that have come on to the Horse Radio Network that way.
There you go. And so, and so again, you started HRN back in 2008 when there were really no other independent podcasters in your field, right? In your lane.
Actually, we didn't have any other shows for 8 years that were competing. So we do now.
I said, right. You're like, if we want a competitor, we need to make it ourselves. So, but with Florida Podcast Network, it is positioned very differently. And I was putting on the little like Band-Aids and rubber bands and piecing it together and doing a little bit this and there. And then you said to me, "Hello, you need a flagship show," and you presented me with the perfect option. And so we just started developing Finding Florida. And similarly, as Horses in the Morning has been a sandbox, a testing ground, a way to meet all the other people in the industry, an excuse to contact, him, her, and everybody in between, Finding Florida has become that way too for Florida Podcast Network. And so it's allowed us to also, using the same similar model, to use Finding Florida in a different way because it's a totally different industry, but also to reach out and make those connections and help build the network. So having a flagship show it can be very, very key to that kind of an effort. And so as Florida Podcast Network was just born, 2 years ago, I think, something like that. The space for podcasting is very different than it was in 2008 because now we have a ton of independent podcasters. And so as you were mentioning, there weren't any independent podcasters in your field. So there was no real initiative or reason for you to have a partnership opportunity to bring in independent podcasters. They didn't exist. But as we were developing Florida Podcast Network, that's started to be something that we had to consider, because there are a lot of podcasters who've had time to develop shows about Florida and grow an audience. And we would rather bring them into the fold than be continuing to compete against them or whatnot. So we also have shows that we grow and produce and host in-house, like Finding Florida and Florida Podcast News. And then we also have shows that are done through other means. And one of the offering that we have for independent podcasters is podcast production partner. And so that's another option as you're building your network. If you're finding people who already have a really, really great show in the kind of industry that you're looking to build a network in, then you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can have them be a podcast production partner. They still handle the production of their show, but then you then bring the show onto your network, and there's benefits to both of you, cross promotion and possibility of selling more to advertisers and all of that. So there are new ways of doing it. HRN, I think, provided an amazing model. Florida Podcast Network has now tweaked that model a little bit. And then we've also seen some other models out there that are so very different and built just on maybe advertising opportunities and stuff. So have you seen, I know we have a bunch of friends who have different networks. What have you seen? Have you seen anything that's very different from what we've already talked about so far?
Well, there are networks that will bring shows on, for no charge, and then they're building their network and then selling advertising across that entire space, all of the shows. So, that is one way. That is another way to do it. But the thing to remember is there's no rules. I don't care what anybody says. There's still no rules for doing this. So, that's something to keep in mind. I think newer podcasters coming in think there are, because there's a lot more being talked about as industry standards and all of that, but we're still making this up. We're still at the beginning. And don't limit yourself. Think outside the box. Do something that's different than everybody else is doing. And that includes with building a network. We have a question here from one of the people watching right now that says, what about small niches that don't have industry magazines, newsletters, or other periodicals? How can someone kickstart their audience growth? Find people.
Bloggers.
There's still people in that niche who are, I hate the word influencers, but there's still people in that niche that are influencers. Get them involved in your show. Give them a segment on your show, something to get them involved.
Yeah.
But then
go to conferences and meet people. If there are any conferences or events and things like that within you got to.
I'm going to one tomorrow.
Not just the content of your show, but the interest of your listeners. Sometimes people think those are going to be the exact same thing, and they're not. They're not. So, for example, if you want to do a show on, we were just talking about the other day, a salt life show, something based on, water sports and the love of the great outdoors of water outdoors in Florida. But the listeners of that show, okay, they love all that stuff, but there's also some things that they love that might not be the direct content of that show. And so, but there might be a show that speaks to that too. So maybe there's a water conservation show that would make sense to be part of a network about water sports, right? So think a little bit outside the box and think not just what is the content you want to deliver, but what is that sister content that also you can look at, the industry, the events, the magazines, all those kinds of things, and find other participants for your network, both sponsors and potential hosts as well.
I've helped a bunch of people start networks now. And I will say this. I will say it's a lot more work than you think it's going to be if you're going to start your own network. There's
a lot of documentation that you have to put together that you don't think about, because people are asking, I want to see this, I want to see that. And you have to be able to deliver.
And run it like a business. You have to think of it like a business, because it is going to be so much work, whether you're making any money at the beginning or not. It's going to become a business because it's so much time.
And because it has to be able to be sustained. Yeah, and you have to, and you're creating an expectation, and this goes to another thing that you say a lot: be consistent. Consistency is key. And so, if whether it's to your listeners, or to your sponsors who are paying to be part of a show, you need to be consistent and create expectations that they know that they can rely on. So all of that comes together to create a successful podcast network, and be patient. You also need to be patient.
Right. Well, and because it's like anything else, it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It
It doesn't
takes
happen
time to
overnight.
build. It takes time to build, and
You're right.
but you're going to put in a lot more hours than you thought you did, but it's eventually going to pay off.
It
And
is.
I
It
think
is.
it's going to pay off a lot quicker than it did for me because the industry is different than it
You're
was
right.
10 years ago,
You're
11 years
right.
ago.
You're
So
right.
it's going to be
So,
hopefully a much faster growth for you.
all right. Well, we can talk all day. And I
And
love
we
to talk
do.
to you all day. We certainly do. Okay. And also, one thing we didn't really quite touch on,
Yeah.
but in addition to building a benefit for advertisers and all that, being part of a network, having a show, or if you're an independent podcaster considering joining a network, remember that also another potential benefit is just the growth of your audience. And Glenn, you've done a really amazing job growing a community behind the theme of your network. And so I just want to encourage people, as one last little tip, to think about growing some sort of online community of listeners that can participate and be active fans of both your flagship show and any other show that you board onto the network. So where can they reach you, Glenn?
HorseRadioNetwork.com. And by the way, I have the best co-host ever, and you can't have her because I already have her. Her name is Jaime, and you can't have her. Nobody else can borrow her.
Wait, are you talking about me? Or are you talking about Jaime
Yes,
Jennings
you.
on Horse?
No, I'm talking about you.
I need some clarification. I'm just making sure. Make sure you got it right. Okay. Well, thank you so much to Glenn. You can find him, as you said, at horseradionetwork.com. We can also find our shows that we do together at floridapodcastnetwork.com, finding Florida Podcast, Florida Podcast News. And you can get more information about everything we're doing at internationalpodcastassociation.org, which is up and coming. I'll tell you a little bit more about later. Thank you so much, guys. Bye, Glenn. All righty.
Okay.
Up next, we are
Who's
going to be
hustling?
talking about
Your mic.
building.
Okay, can you hear me fine?
Oh, we can hear you,
I can
Daisy.
hear you. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah, everyone heard all that. Just letting you know, everybody heard all
Hey,
that.
everybody. Okay, I'm
This is the
taking
joy of
mic.
live broadcasting, people.
Taking
We also
the
have Paul on.
headphones.
Paul knows all the joys of live broadcasting. He comes from a radio background as well. So let me just introduce our next
Okay, I don't
guest.
know
I'm so
when-
excited. We're turning our attention, as Daisy's still figuring out her mic. That's okay. We are turning our attention to networking in person. So there's the idea of networking by stitching your show and latching it onto somebody else's network ship, right? But there's also networking in person by building your local professional network. And joining us, I have Paul Desmond Adams and Daisy Cedeno from Palm Beach Podcasters. Now, Paul spent most of his life dreaming of being an entertainer who could make people's lives happier and more enjoyable. He's such a sweetheart. But it wasn't until his mid-30s that he overcame his fears and he quit his comfortable job as an engineer and took a massive pay cut and chased that dream of becoming a radio personality. And within 2 years, he actually was earning more than ever before, and he reached nearly 1 million listeners. I'm excited that he is now my co-organizer for the Palm Beach Podcasters. Hello to Paul.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm at a radio station right now, so my lighting.
I can tell. I was like, are you either at a radio station or I need to be way more jealous of your home setup than I thought I needed to be?
No, but I did to commemorate. I wore my T-shirt for the day.
No, podcasts kill the radio star.
Yeah, I'm still
hey,
here.
no. Podcasts cause the radio star to evolve.
That is right. That's right. Just shifted a little bit. But thank you so much for including me, not only here today, but with the Palm Beach Podcasters group. And when you say co-organizer, I always make it clear that you organize everything, and then I show up and say,
"Stop it! That is
organized." So that is
baloney.
True. But
well, you at least show up on time. That's more than I do. So why did you want to become a co-organizer of the Palm Beach Podcasters? What is the potential impact that you saw could be made there?
It was to keep me going, to keep me motivated and sustained. Because, I was part of a podcasting group years ago, and it was like an 1.5-hour drive. It eventually evolved into this huge podcasting group. But I know that every time I got together, we were going to talk about, what are you doing with your show? What are you doing with it? And if I didn't want to be the one going, well, I haven't really done anything yet. So I know whether it's AA or it's church or it's Weight Watchers, just checking in keeps you accountable and keeps you moving forward. That's why I wanted to do it.
That is very, very true. And Daisy, are you hearing us now?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Also with us is Daisy Cedeno. She is a bilingual radio and television personality and producer. She is the producer and host of the Hispanic and American radio show Al Dia con Daisy, which I just love to say, Al Dia con Daisy in Traffic Center. She is a news reporter for several radio stations on the East Coast of South Florida, Boston, Virginia, Maryland. The list goes on. She's also the founder of Podcast Express Academy, which she gave us a taste of a couple of meetings ago. It was absolutely fantastic. And you have a master's in leadership, bachelor's in organizational management, and you also graduated from the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, which I'm so excited I got to be just recently their first ever podcasting instructor. So that's pretty cool.
Yes, that's awesome.
But most importantly, throw all that out. Who cares? You're a member of the Palm Beach Podcast.
Yes, that's it. You have to start like that.
Exactly. So, from your perspective, Daisy, why did you want to join the Palm Beach Podcasters?
Well, at the same time that we're on the air, we're doing what we love and everything, but I'm always in the studio. I'm always, very isolated in a way. I mean, I talk with a bunch of radio stations all the time. It's crazy. I'm surrounded by people, but I'm not surrounded by people. So when I go to, the meetups and I touch people and I said, oh, you're real. You exist. Yes. There's people out there.
I know podcast. We get so isolated sometimes in our closets, our studios, or in your case, your studio one, which was your laundry room, Daisy. Right? I remember you told us.
I'm proud of that.
Well, what I love about going to meetup groups and mingling with fellow podcasters, honest to God, sometimes we just need someone to talk to know that we're not the only one dealing with a certain situation. We think we're the only ones. So
yes,
or we feel like our question's too stupid to ask.
and also you, for some reason, I need to connect with people that have the same language, that we do. Because if I talk about microphones or, speakers and software to somebody that is not related to communication broadcasting, they're like, oh, that sounds fun. And that's it. That's the end of that conversation. And when I get together with you guys and the whole community of Palm Beach podcasters, I'm able to talk, my heart out or whatever it is related to broadcasting. So I'm really excited. That is right here in Palm Beach County. That's where we are right now. And I'm just very excited about Palm Beach podcasters and everything that is going on with the podcast revolution. I have to say, it's like it's like everywhere. Even the people that never thought to do a podcast, they said, "Oh, I like this. Let me try it out." And of course, Podcast Express Academy, I put it together because there's a lot of people are intimidated by the editing part and what is this, and it's not that hard. I mean, you have to learn it. You have to go through the training and just get used to it. And even when you learn it, you still like touching buttons. I'm like, okay, what is this for? I forgot it, So even when you learn it, you still have to keep practicing. So it's a whole process. It's a journey, and I love it. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. And so, Paul, we have seen people as skilled and experienced and well-versed in broadcasting and podcasting as Daisy, but we've also seen complete newbies come through. I mean, literally haven't cracked a mic open yet come through our doors. Where do you see, like, I love that there's such a mix of participants in our meetup group. And I know that we're not unique. That's kind of what it is.
Yeah. It's one of the things you and I talked about is how do we provide content that will meet people wherever they are, because we're gonna have people like you said who they just have this dream of a show, like it's like, oh, I had this idea, I just kind of wanted to see what you guys are doing, and so we're trying to meet that person's need. But then we've also got somebody, I know when we even talked about it with Daisy and her experience, and so we don't want to bore her with talking about getting into podcasting, but then we also don't want to like talk over everybody else's level. It's a hard thing to do, but you can do it.
It is. Yeah. So, and I think what we figured out is to use people who are very experienced to get up in front of the group and present themselves. And so, Daisy, you did your Podcast Express for our group a couple of meetings ago. So it was great because now we have one of our most experienced members up there sharing her knowledge and experience with the newbies, and they were just eating it up. And now you've crafted that into a whole online offering, haven't you?
Yes, I'm also working with different libraries because they have podcast studios within their technology department. I talk with my hands because I'm Italian and Latina, so that's why. So I thought it was like interesting that even the libraries, they're getting into this. Okay, this is interesting, exciting. And we're going to create a small podcast studio in the libraries. So I'm working with some libraries in downtown West Palm Beach, and that's in like an hour from Miami. So I put together like a master class that is going to be one day, the whole day. But there's also a class for people who just can make it for 1 hour on Tuesday afternoons. We're gonna change it. We're gonna change it for Thursday because it's overlapping other stuff that I was doing. But the fact that other, like there's a lot of educational programs trying to implement this new technology, this new movement, it's interesting. So I created a web series and I created a, like one-on-one too, and also groups within like entrepreneurs, business owners. They can do it only for 1 hour on a Thursday, or they can spend with me a Saturday morning and learn about this, launching your podcast right there. And we have a couple people from the last event, the previous one, that already have a podcast after the Podcast Express that we did.
That's fantastic.
We did. So
that's amazing.
I was so excited to see it.
Man,
yeah. So something really struck me after actually the last meeting. So I really want this segment to encourage people to seek out a local meetup or like similar event or start one. We had the absolute honor of hosting as our special guest at this last one a 35-year broadcast executive. I mean, Chet Tart. That's not something that you can just, and for free. All of our attendees got to meet him and pick his brain for free. And that's what you get from these kind of meetups. And then what was also interesting is at the end of them, whether it's ours or whether we're presenting or we have a special guest presenter, that at the end, people kind of naturally break off into like little groups of 3 and 4. They start sharing ideas, collaborating. Like it's developing this little think tank ecosystem that's just this meetup group. It's pretty cool.
It's one of the things we talked about, making sure we put at the beginning. Remember we were saying, let's put a little social time in there. So if you're going to start a group like this, make sure there's that time. That's the glue that keeps everybody coming back, is because now they're making friends with other people. Like you said, Daisy, who speak our language, who know, like I can go to my wife editing the show or something. She'll listen, but
exactly. She'll listen because she loves you and she cares for you, but that's it.
When I talk to you guys about that, you're just like, yes, me too.
But don't push it. Don't push it with your wife. There's a limit.
Yeah. Believe me, I know.
Yeah, there's definitely. Yeah, it's honest to God. So when we do our meetups, we start with the social, and then once everyone sits down, I'll kind of get up and lead the beginning piece, and I'll give everyone a chance to go around, introduce themselves, what they're podcasting about, what they're there for, and it always ends up kind of turning into a bit of a support session, therapy session, because we all.
I agree. It's like I feel like I can speak now, and I can get up. I have a podcast. I think that's the first. I have a podcast. I've been doing it for a while. And I'm addicted to podcasting. I guess that's the way to do it.
Yeah. So
I see it like an AA meeting where you're committing that. My name's Paul, and I'm a podcaster.
I'm a podcaster. This is the first time I've been out of my room in 2 weeks.
Other people also admitting it.
Definitely. And you know what? Sometimes there's people who come to the meetups that they are, playing with the idea of putting together a podcast, and they don't even know they like what we do. They see what we do and they're excited, but they don't know how to. Sometimes it's easy just to get a mic and headphones connected, and now what? And then that's when you need to put a logistics and a structure. Okay, you cannot just have because you're going to have only 2 shows, and that's going to be the end of your podcast if you don't have like a mission and why are you doing what you're doing. So it's a way also to connect to how am I going to do this and how should I do it? That is a long-term relationship because
it helps people from pod fading. Sometimes we just need that little in the arm.
Yep.
We need a minute to vent or what have you, or we're at a loss for an idea and we just need some help. We don't know, this is the issue.
Yes.
For example, at the last meeting, there was a couple that was doing this show about related to boating, and their editing process was extensive, and it was causing them to consider pod fading, and that breaks my heart a little bit. So literally half the room rallied and said, okay, this is the idea, this is our idea, let's put our heads together and figure out how we can all come up with an idea to keep you from pod fading and encourage you. So I love that about meetup groups. I love that about our meetup group. Thank you, both of you, for being such amazing participants in that, and thank you especially to Paul for helping me organize it. So Paul, where can people find you? Tell us about your show and where they can find it and all that stuff.
Also,
What are your things?
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, you do so much work, and I'm running to try to keep up with you. I feel like I'm always trying to catch up with what you're doing. So credit all goes to you, but I'm so grateful and I'm glad, because it's important for all the reasons I mentioned, having a local group that you meet in real life.
Yes.
I agree.
So I was podcasting for years, and then I stopped and I started helping people. So I kind of went through that pod fade thing, but it was more intentional. Anyway, I just relaunched a new show with a friend of mine called The Key. That's it. The Key. And so he's a licensed psychotherapist. I got to get the license part in there. So yeah, it's legit.
Right.
Anyway, so we take people who are sick and tired of self-help stuff, and we try to break through some of the
I love it.
stuff. Yeah, thank you, Daisy. Actually, I saw Daisy gave a nice review. Thank you very much for that, Daisy. I appreciate it. But you can find me at masterthekey.com. So real easy, masterthekey.com. And again, thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Absolutely. Thank you. And how about you, Daisy? Tell us where they can find you. I know Daisy's today, but tell us what you're doing.
Well, everywhere in social media, I try to be very active. Daisy Sedeno at Instagram at Daisy Sedeno, also Twitter. I'm also in Facebook as Daisy Sedeno Public Figure, and LinkedIn. It's very active. LinkedIn is crazy now. There's a lot of podcasters in LinkedIn. And it's a business area, but I do a lot of postings over there. And also, of course, find my podcast, Al Dia con Daisy, in iTunes, Spotify, and my website, daisysedeno.com. I also have a podcast about Hispanic in America, talking about the Hispanics in United States. And I also launched a podcast with my teenager son. It's called None of Our Business. Just to motivate, Generation Z to get your ideas out there. And of course, I'm going to start with my own son, of course. So I have that. So daisysedeno.com. Just find me there and everything that I'm doing. I'm really excited to be part of this. This is the first time that I'm part of the International Podcast Day. And I'm going to take a picture. Can I take a picture of us?
Take a picture, Daisy.
Yes.
I feel like it's not going to be your last time. Not at all. Not even close. You're so fantastic. Well, thank you guys both. And if you are local to the South Florida area and would like to meet them in person, head to palmbeachpodcasters.com. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And without further ado, and I see he brought some friends along. I am so proud and honored to introduce you to my next guest, Mr. Chris Krimitsos. He is a man who helped drive and craft the podcasting scene, not just in Florida, but globally. It's been a sight to see, to witness in person, a lot of it firsthand. So, all right, let me tell you who Chris Krimitsos is in case y'all don't know. He's facilitated over 2,000 events that have brought together business owners and impacted economic growth under the umbrella of the Tampa Bay Business Owners, which he founded in 2008. So it's about as old as Horse Radio Network. Actually, I wonder which one's older. I don't know. But that success regionally was a springboard for him to launch PodFest, which is a multimedia expo. Happens every year in Orlando. And it's my mecca. So if you're into podcasting, independent podcasters need to make it over to PodFest every year. But as a filmmaker and producer, along with his partner right there next to him, Mr. Neil Giarte, Chris successfully birthed a documentary that crystallized the passion and purpose of the podcasting industry called The Messengers, right there on the shirt. It has obtained worldwide distribution and theatrical screenings, of which I've been to multiples, I must admit. And in case that was enough to keep him busy. Chris is also the organizer of the podcasting meetup group called the Florida Podcasters Association, and recently also an author. And a dad of two. Come on, Chris. You are a busy man. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Jaime. Thank you for having us on. And Gabe is behind us, but his head is.
Like Gabe. I can't. I was wondering who that headless horseman was. Oh, yay. What surprises. All right. So just let the audience know a little bit more. So Neil Chiarte is the owner of Wild Style Media, which was the production house for the Messenger documentary. He does a lot of other things. And Gabe Aloisi is he's the owner of my heart. He is just awesome. He was a springboard for what actually got me meeting Chris Krimitsos in the first place. And actually is perfect for this discussion today, because we're talking about how do you growing your podcast business, your podcast itself within the industry, all the different opportunities there are to grow within the industries. So let's start talking about that just a little bit. So you have birth Podfest Multimedia Expo. Chris, first of all, why did you think podcasting needed that kind of a conference?
Well, I had done quite a few conferences in business, and I noticed that podcasting has a lot of great people like yourself, myself, Neil, Glenn the Geek, and we wanted to make a conference that was community first, and everything revolved around the members. So, you know this, we retain the majority of our audience comes back year after year, as well as bring new friends to the fold. So community first, education is provided by the community. Technically, quite honestly, we always have a big name speaker, but we really don't need one. Sounds kind of ironic, but our people show up for each other first. And they support one another. And then the education that comes out of it is phenomenal. We have some of the best education in the world.
Yeah, you've really done a good job of creating those relationships and making Podfest about that first and foremost. Did you carry that from, because also side note, you're the organizer of the Florida Podcasters Association, which is, I don't know if it is, but it has to be one of the most successful podcasting meetup groups in the world. It's pretty popular. You do amazing things. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you learn growing community specifically within the podcasting space first through being an organizer of the meetup group, or through being an organizer of Podfest? Actually,
even before that, when we started Tampa Bay Business Owners, we learned about community. And one thing, I made a distinction in my late 20s. I wanted to be surrounded by people with positive mental attitudes, integrity, personally and professionally, and people that want to support each other and live in an abundant mindset. So that's kind of where that all came from. So I figured if we're going to spend time with each other, let's create an environment where we all can help each other. This guy right here was part of that group. And then we started playing around with podcast workshops before even Podfest. And then he launched All Things Post because my wife, Katie, launched Biz Women Rock. Then Gabe launched a branding podcast before he ever launched Private Club Radio. So then we said, let's create a meetup for all these people that we've helped launch our podcast. And then out of that meetup also came out Podfest. So it's literally a continuation, and then we meet amazing people like yourself, and Glenn the Geek shows up. Before you know it, you got a tribe that's there for one another, and it's a really special thing.
It's true. So that's what I love about the podcasting community in general, and that's what I especially love about the way all the things that you're influencing in the podcast, helping to grow and influence in the podcasting community, because it really does focus on personal relationships first. And so, as I teased earlier, the reason I know Chris is because of a program called Pay It Forward, which was the brainchild of the man in the back, who was formerly the Headless Horseman, Gabe Aloisi. And that program was, well, I'll let you speak to that program and its impact and on the podcasting community.
Yeah, I'll let Gabe go ahead, buddy.
Well, I know we were kind of noodling around. How can we make Podfest a community? And I got the idea that I really just wanted to help creators out there just get started. I thought that would be such a cornerstone to what Podfest was all about. And so I went up to Chris and asked him, hey, Chris, would it be possible if I could just buy a ticket for somebody? I already had a ticket because I was speaking at that conference, but I wanted to pay it forward and get somebody there who needed a chance. Who maybe couldn't afford it, couldn't get there for whatever reason. And Chris was nice enough to say yes. So,
well, I thank you very much for starting that program, because I'm a direct benefactor of that. And again, it speaks to building relationships, building community. And so in building PodFest, you've certainly done an amazing job of doing that, but certainly you can't reach everyone through PodFest. Was that why part of the reason why you wanted to start the Messengers and put the Messengers documentary together?
Yeah, Neil and I were talking, and I said to Neil, I think we got a movie here, but please don't say yes easily, because I know it's going to be a lot of work. And this was in 2016. He's like, yeah.
You say that, Chris, but you are very, very motivational and very,
I am,
fill in the blank with the appropriate word here.
It's more like before you do this. Yes, right.
No, but we had that's when we had Danny Pena, Gamertag Radio. You got Miami's Windward District. You have Glenn the Geek with the Horse World. We have all these amazing content creators. Denicia Hilton, Sister Flo. So all these weird, unique niches, and traveled for a year, right, Neil? I'll let you complete that.
No, it's just amazing. We followed them all around the country. We went to other countries like Guatemala and went to Puerto Rico, and basically got all their stories together, and then long nights of editing to bring it into the story that it is. And it was just released yesterday.
We re-released it now free for everybody on social media, so feel free to share it. That movie is on Amazon Prime, and we wanted to give it out to the world
today.
Yeah, and so I know I saw you guys were getting ready to do that. I got your email, you sent me a text. I'm like, wait, what? You are just, my gosh, you were just giving away all of these wonderful nuggets and all these wonderful opportunities for people to learn about podcasting, communicate, connect with other podcasters, and get into the space and learn about the space. And not only that, but as I was just speaking about with Paul and Daisy from Palm Beach Podcasters, sometimes it just feels good for us to be able to talk to someone who understands who we're dealing with and what our daily lives really is. And this documentary acts as a bridge for all of us podcasters to talk to our family members, give it to them and say, this is what I'm doing. This answers a lot of your questions.
The number one thing that we would get emails from is people saying, I sent it to my dad or my mom.
There you
go.
Now
they understand what I do. Thank you so much and we wanted to create a visual representation of an audio medium, because a lot of people didn't see what podcasting is. So that's kind of what drove us. And, hundreds of thousands of views later, we're just really proud to have put a historical record for that time. This was 2-3 years ago, of what the medium of podcasting was becoming and where it was going. And a lot of the predictions in that movie have now come to pass, which is
so thanks for the time capsule.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, so talking about podcast conferences again, circling back to that, what I've loved, my experience in going to PodFest and other conferences, is that you have an opportunity not to just attend, but then to also be a speaker, a presenter. You can stretch your own wings, so to speak, and kind of, it gives you a moment to pause and say, what do I know? What have I learned? What can I share with others? How have you seen, being stepping back for a minute, you're up here looking down. How do you see those opportunities that people have taken advantage of and enjoyed, and how has that helped their podcast and their podcast career?
I mean, you're probably one of the best case studies we could show. I mean, you're an educator at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting, which is legendary. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
But then you have people like Diane Daniels, who started Medicare Nation. She helps people all over the world now instead of just a localized thing. Neil helps editors with all things post. And we have a lady that started a thing called Balancing Point for ballerinas all over the world. And she has a whole network. So honestly, I could talk about, my wife does meditation for women, Women's Meditation Network, and that's been really doing well, helping women and their meditative practices. And PodFest now, we actually helped Jessica Kupferman and Elsie Escobar with launching the first ever She Podcast conference in the world. So we're really excited about all the amazing transformative change we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So people have the opportunity to speak and present and get themselves known and their name of themselves and their brand out there.
Up until today, if you go to the PodFest Multimedia Expo community page on Facebook, you'll see the link. You could apply to speak. We've had over 200 submissions this year.
How many?
Over 200.
Wow. And today's the deadline, right? Am I correct on that? All right. So everybody get your typing keys going. You got submit yourself to speak at PodFest. It has been an absolute joy watching the conference grow. I mean, just I've seen how much magic happens. As wonderful as the education tracks are, and they're invaluable, I have seen so much magic happen in those hallways. It is a amazing thing to see. And I think if people are trying to figure out how do I grow as a podcaster, the whole purpose of this presentation is it's about the connections that you make, and you make amazing connections when you go to these conferences, when you speak at these conferences, and then when you mingle at these conferences. Yeah.
We have fun. Like Neil over here has got the giggles over here. I don't know what's
I don't know what memories you're thinking of, Neil.
We got gauge our security if anything happens here.
I don't trust any of you.
We have fun. That's the thing.
Oh man. Okay, well, so tell us, where can they find all of your things? I mean, I know there's podfestexpo.com, right?
Yep.
All right.
Personally, if they want to learn about anything that I'm doing, it's chriskremitzos.com, and Google
Okay.
spell my name.
Right.
The other day, Neil knows me now for 10 years. He spelled Chris with a K. I don't know how he did that.
I was thinking Kremitz.
That's okay. Just always invert the E and the I in his first name. Yeah, that's why you get it back.
But that and find us on social media. Anything with Podfest Expo, you'll find us. We're on pretty much every social media platform. We're excited, Jimmy. We're hoping. It looks like we're on track for over 2,000 attendees next year. Community.
Wow.
But we need
that's 2,000 people to connect with.
Yeah, we need more ambassadors like yourself. So we're annexing as many 1, 2, 3 year attendees to be ambassadors to the new people's experience, because there's only so many Jemmys. We need more to help bring in.
There's only one. There's only one.
That's true. There's only one Jemmy, that's for sure. But we need more people welcoming all the new people, because we want them to feel at home. We want them to understand that we care about them. And if they have any issues or they need help, we're there for them.
And that's the wonderful thing about this industry. But more importantly, I think that's the handprint that you're leaving on this industry, is that kind of leadership quality. So thank you so much to Chris, and to my unexpected and wonderful guests, Neil and Gabe. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful day, guys. Happy International Podcast Day. Bye. All right. Oh my gosh. So let's talk a little bit more. Let's put a nice pin on all of these discussions that we've had today, and talk a little bit more about the benefits of network, being part of a network, and networking in general. So as we've talked about, you can use, if you're talking about networks specifically, you can use a show on your network as a flagship show. It may not be the show that you currently have. Maybe there's another show that you need to create, or maybe you can tweak the current show that you have. But you can have a show that's on the network that is a flagship show. Use it as a testing ground. Use it to interview other hosts, that they don't necessarily know that they're being interviewed, and all of that, and to test other new things. And you can also use it to have sponsors and your listeners involved, so you can grow both sets of audiences through a network. Alrighty, and cross promoting, you can do a lot of that with the network or outside of a network. So if you still want to stay as an independent show, you can also cross promote your show by having yourself on as a guest on other podcasts, or inviting other podcasters on as guests on your show, or as guest co-hosts on your show. So that kind of cross promotion can really help to grow your show and your podcast. Let's see what else. You can cross promote with your listeners. You can invite your listeners on as guest hosts. You can have them contribute content. Most often that's done via some emails or voicemails that you might share on your show. But there are other ways to do it. For example, Glenn at Horse Radio Network, they have a program with their super fans, which they call auditors. And their auditors can be involved in product reviews. So sponsors will send products to the auditors. Auditors will then test the products out, and then become part of the show, get on the show, do a product review. And it makes the sponsors, they love that kind of stuff. It's real, it's authentic. The listeners love that kind of stuff. Now they're going to share the show and the episode like gangbusters. So you can cross promote with your listeners that way. Finding Florida, we have a roaming reporter program. So we have anybody in the state of Florida can submit like a 5-minute audio clip of them going out and doing something, and then they submit it to the show. We include it on Finding Florida, and that's another way that we cross promote, because now they're going to be sharing it like crazy. And also, you can cross promote more specifically to talk about your sponsors too. So once you're done working, like let's say you've had an ad or something like that in a show, or you've had a sponsor on as a guest on the show, send them an email when the episode comes out, include a link to that episode, an embed code that they can place on their website, maybe even pitch a potential social media post or a way to describe it in an e-blast, something like that. Make sure you include the episode art in that email, and of course share your contact information and your social media links and handles, and send that out, and then they'll use that as an email to also help promote the show. And so those are all the things that you can do. So hopefully through building a network or learning how you can literally network in person or network strategically within the industry, look for events that you can speak at or attend, and getting people involved with your show. You can ask questions, meet people that way. It's a phenomenal way to do it. So hopefully this presentation has helped you guys a little bit. I want to thank Dave Lee and the entire International Podcasting team. First and foremost, thank you so much. Thank you also to my guests, Glenn the Geek, Paul Desmond Adams, Daisy Sedania, and Chris Kermitso. Now, Glenn and I will be sharing the audio. We got permission from Dave. We'll be sharing the audio from this presentation as our next episode of Florida Podcasting News. So if you missed any information presented today, you can catch it tomorrow at floridapodcastingnews.com. But stay tuned for International Podcast Day, internationalpodcastday.com/live, which you already are on. There's tons of great speakers and content coming up. And remember, in the spirit of International Podcast Day, please continue to share all the podcasts you love all over social media with the person next to you pumping gas or in front of you in the line at the grocery store today. Like, share your podcast, even if it's renting a plane, and do some skywriting. Share your podcast today. Thanks, everybody, and happy International Podcast Day.
Well, thank you for so much. The Florida Podcasters Association is just a great group. We've been back there for Podfest, and it's just an amazing time. But I will say this. I've been in the Starbucks line a million times, and nobody's paid it forward to me. So, I want that caramel macchiato free. So,
well, you know what? Maybe if you tell them about your favorite podcast today, then someone will thank you by buying you a caramel macchiato. It can happen, right?
I'm going to try. As always, I thank you so much for being a presenter for International Podcast Day 2019, and look forward to hopefully seeing you at the next Podfest.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Take care.